Michael had always been the kind of man who kept his head down at work. He liked things simple, quiet, and clear. He went to the office, finished his tasks, and left without thinking too much about anything else. But things began to change the moment Claire arrived. She was the new project manager, fresh from another city. And though she carried herself with professionalism, there was something about her presence that was hard to ignore. Michael noticed it the first week she joined. At first, it was just her smile. Whenever he spoke during meetings, she smiled in a way that felt genuine, not like the polite expression people wear when they're supposed to look engaged. Her eyes seemed to follow him when he talked, holding on to his words longer than anyone else's. He thought maybe he was imagining it. But then it happened again the next day. She laughed at a comment he made during a briefing, a comment no one else even reacted to. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was soft, almost private, as if it was meant only for him. That was when Michael began to wonder if there was something more behind her gaze. One afternoon, during a routine meeting, he became more aware of it. As he explained his ideas to the team, he caught her eyes on him, not just watching, but watching with a light in them. It was the kind of look that made his chest tighten without him knowing why. And then it happened. She leaned slightly forward, resting her chin on her hand, and didn't look away. The room was filled with voices, but in that moment, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. Michael shook off the thought as soon as the meeting ended. He told himself not to read too much into it. People could be friendly without meaning anything. Claire was new, maybe she was just being polite, but deep inside, something stirred. Something that made it hard for him to ignore the way she looked at him. The following week, he got his answer, or at least part of it. The office was crowded, everyone rushing to meet deadlines, and Claire walked past his chair. It was nothing unusual, except for the way it happened. Her hand brushed lightly against his arm, almost too soft to notice, but just enough to send a spark racing up his skin. He glanced up, and there she was, looking right at him. She didn't move her eyes away quickly like most people would. She held his gaze for a second longer than she should have, her lips curving into a small smile, the kind that felt like a secret. Michael froze. He wanted to believe it was coincidence, but the truth was, deep down, he knew better. Her eyes told a different story. They were not the eyes of someone who was merely friendly. They were the eyes of someone drawn in. Someone unable to hide the pull she felt. That night, Michael couldn't stop thinking about it. The way she looked at him stayed in his mind like an unfinished sentence waiting for its ending. He replayed the moment again and again, asking himself if he was only imagining it, if perhaps he was reading into something that wasn't really there. But every memory, every detail, the smile, the laughter, the lingering eyes felt too real to dismiss. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Claire wasn't just being kind. She wasn't just being polite. She was doing something else, something far more telling. She was revealing herself without words, showing him her heart in the only way she could. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt unsettled in the best way. He wasn't a man who believed in love at first sight, or in sudden sparks that changed the course of a life. But with Claire, things felt different. There was something in her eyes, in the way she looked at him, that carried weight. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was powerful, and though she hadn't said a word, he knew. A woman who is deeply attracted doesn't always confess in words. Sometimes it shows in the way she looks at you, the way her presence shifts when you enter the room, the way her eyes linger when everyone else looks away. Michael had never felt it before, but now he was living it. And in that quiet moment, he realized something important. Claire was always doing this in front of him. And it was only the beginning. From that day on, Michael began to notice more than just her eyes. Claire had a way of being near him, as if the universe itself kept pulling them into the same space. At first, he thought it was coincidence. She showed up at the coffee machine the same time he did. She left the building almost exactly when he did. Even during lunch breaks, she somehow ended up sitting at the table next to his. But after a while, the pattern became too clear. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, even if she never admitted it. One morning, Michael walked into the office early, expecting the place to be empty. To his surprise, Claire was already there, sitting by the window with her laptop open. She looked up, and her face lit with a smile that seemed far too bright for that hour. "You're early too," she said softly. It wasn't just the word zit, it was the way her tone shifted when she spoke to him. Gentle, warm, like he was the only person she wanted to see at that moment. Michael gave a small nod, trying to hide the fact that her smile had already stirred something inside him. As days passed, her gestures grew more obvious, though never bold. She leaned closer when he spoke, almost like she didn't want to miss a single word. She laughed at his smallest jokes, sometimes covering her mouth in that shy way, but always keeping her eyes fixed on him. When he adjusted his chair, she adjusted hers. When he leaned back, she leaned back too. At first, he thought it was a trick of his mind, but the more it happened, the more he saw it she mirrored him without realizing it. It was like her heart was tuned to his rhythm. Then there were the little things. Details so small they would have been invisible if he hadn't started paying attention. She tucked her hair behind her ear every time he entered the room. She touched her necklace when he was near, as if grounding herself. When someone else was talking, she glanced at them politely. But the moment Michael spoke, her whole body shifted toward him. Her attention undivided. One evening, after a long meeting, everyone left the conference room in a rush. Michael stayed back, collecting his notes. Claire lingered too, pretending to check her phone. For a moment, it was just the two of them. She looked up, caught his eyes, and gave that small, almost secret smile again. "You make these meetings less tiring," she said lightly. The words were simple, but the way she said them carried weight. It wasn't about meetings. It was about him. Michael walked home that night with her words replaying in his mind. He could feel it now with certainty. This wasn't just friendliness. This was attraction, quiet but strong. And she was showing it not with confessions or grand gestures, but through her presence. She didn't need to say she wanted to be close. She proved it by always finding ways to stay near. The next week, the signs grew stronger. He stayed late one evening to finish a report. Hours passed, and when he finally looked up, Claire was still there at her desk. Everyone else had gone. She looked up, caught his surprised expression, and shrugged. "Couldn't leave you here alone?" she said with a soft laugh. It was playful, but Michael felt the meaning behind it. She wanted to be there. She chose to be there. Even during the busiest days, she carved out moments for him. If he walked to the break room, she followed a minute later. If he stepped outside for air, she appeared with her coffee in hand. If their eyes met across the office, she didn't look away quickly like most people. Would she held the connection? Almost daring him to notice what she wasn't saying, Michael found himself caught between emotions. On one hand, he felt a deep pull toward her, something that made his days brighter and his work lighter. On the other hand, he worried, what if he misread her? What if this was all just kindness, and he had created meaning where there was none? But no matter how much he tried to convince himself otherwise, her actions kept proving him wrong. People don't mirror your movements without realizing it unless they feel connected. People don't linger around you every chance they get unless they want more than just small talk. The truth pressed harder on him with each passing day. Claire was giving him signals, but in the softest, most subtle ways. She was leaving it up to him to see them, to understand them, and he did. Still, the question lingered in his heart. What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? Should he step closer or keep pretending not to notice? For now, he decided to do nothing, to just watch. To let her gestures keep painting the picture that words had not yet spoken. And in that decision, he found both comfort and torment. Comfort in knowing her attraction was real, and torment in not knowing where it would lead. And as he left the office that evening, he realized one thing clearly. Claire's presence was no accident. Every glance, every laugh, every quiet choice to stay near him was all part of a silent language. A language only the two of them could understand. The rain had started just as the office emptied for the evening. Most people rushed out with umbrellas in hand, eager to escape the storm. But Michael stayed behind, focused on finishing his report. He thought he was alone until he heard the faint click of heels against the floor. Looking up, he saw Claire walking back into the room with a notebook in her hand. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying that familiar softness. Michael gave a small smile. "Deadlines don't care about the weather." She laughed gently, setting her notebook on the table across from him. Instead of going back to her desk, she sat down in the chair facing his. The glow of the city lights reflected off the rain-smeared windows, painting the room in a golden haze. The hum of the storm outside made the silence between them feel heavier, but not uncomfortable. For a while they worked in quiet. Every so often, Michael glanced up and found her already watching him. She didn't look away quickly or pretend she was focused elsewhere. She just held his eyes with a look that carried more weight than any words could. It wasn't bold, yet it wasn't shy either. It was steady, almost like a confession spoken without sound. Michael felt something stir in him, a mix of nerves and longing. The way she leaned her chin into her hand, smiling softly as he scribbled notes, felt too personal, too tender to ignore. He wanted to say something, anything, to break the invisible barrier between them, but the words stayed trapped in his chest. Then it happened. She reached across the table, sliding a pen toward him that had rolled too far. Their hands almost touched, and for a second, neither of them moved. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the pen, her eyes locked on his. The air between them tightened, filled with something unspoken, yet undeniable. Michael swallowed hard, unsure if he should break the moment or let it stretch longer. His heart told him what her silence meant, but his mind kept warning him not to mistake kindness for something deeper. And yet everything about her told a different story, the way she smiled at only him. The way she chose to stay late when she could have gone home. The way her presence seemed to wrap around him in the quiet room. Claire finally spoke, her voice low and thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like some people make the world feel lighter just by being there?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at her carefully, searching her eyes for meaning. "Yes," he said slowly. "I think I know what you mean." She gave him that small, secret smile again. Nothing more, but it was enough. It was as if she had laid her heart on the table without actually saying the words. The storm outside grew louder, but the space between them felt quieter. Michael realized then that Claire didn't need to confess out loud. She had been confessing all along through her eyes, her laughter, her choice to always be near him. This night was only making it clearer. He wanted to reach across the table, to take her hand, to tell her he felt the same pull she did, but fear held him back. Fear of ruining what they had, fear of misreading something so delicate. So instead he leaned back in his chair, his eyes still locked with hers, and let the silence carry the weight of everything they weren't saying. She stayed like that for a long while, chin resting in her hand, eyes never leaving his. It was a gaze filled with quiet warmth, but also longing. A gaze that said, "I'm here. I feel this too. Can't you see it?" And Michael did see it. More clearly than ever before, when the rain finally softened and the clock pushed toward midnight, Claire gathered her things. She stood, hesitated for a moment, then looked at him one last time. "Don't stay too late," she said with a soft laugh, but her eyes gave away the real message. It wasn't about staying late. It was about him. Michael nodded, but he didn't move. He just watched her walk away, her figure fading down the hallway. The echo of her steps mixing with the fading storm. And as the door closed behind her, Michael sat in silence, his heart racing with the truth he could no longer deny. Claire's feelings weren't hidden. They had been there all along, written in her gestures, her smiles, her silences. Tonight, she hadn't confessed with words. She hadn't needed to. Her silent confession was louder than anything she could have spoken. Days turned into weeks. But the rhythm between Michael and Claire never changed. If anything, it grew stronger. Their eyes still found each other across crowded rooms. Their conversations still carried that softness, like every word held a second meaning. She still lingered when she didn't need to, still smiled in ways that belonged only to him. Nothing was said outright, yet everything was felt. Michael noticed how natural it had become. At meetings, she always took the chair closest to his. During breaks, she appeared at his side without planning it. If he looked tired, she would bring him coffee without being asked. If he was quiet, she found ways to make him laugh. It was as though she had made a quiet promise to always be near him. And though she never voiced it, he felt it in every gesture. One Friday evening, the office was buzzing with people finishing their work before the weekend. Michael was standing by the window, watching the sunset reflect off the glass towers, when Claire walked up beside him. She didn't speak right away. She simply stood there, shoulder to shoulder with him, watching the same view. After a while, she said softly, "It's funny how the city looks so different at this hour. Like it's keeping secrets." Michael turned slightly, studying her face in the fading light. She looked calm, but there was something deeper in her eyes. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe it's just us noticing more than we usually do." Their eyes met. Once again, that familiar silence grew between them. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said yet. Claire smiled gently, then looked back at the skyline. "Some things are better left unspoken," she whispered, almost to herself. Michael felt his chest tighten. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that some things deserved to be spoken, but he couldn't. Not yet. So instead, he let the silence stretch. The weekend passed, and when Monday came, their subtle dance continued. Claire still mirrored his movements without realizing it. She still found excuses to be near him. She still laughed at his smallest jokes, her voice softer when it was only the two of them. Michael, meanwhile, found himself caught in a quiet battle. Part of him longed to confess what he felt, to break the silence once and for all. But another part feared ruining the fragile beauty of what they already had. One evening, they both stayed late again. The office was empty, the city lights glowing outside. Claire sat across from him, her notebook open, but she wasn't really working. She rested her chin in her hands, watching him the way she always did. Eyes steady, smile gentle, presence warm. It was the same silent confession he had seen before, only stronger now. Michael looked back at her, and for a moment he almost spoke. But then she smiled in that quiet way, as if telling him without words that she already knew, that she didn't need him to say it yet, that being here, together, was enough. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. It struck him that sometimes love doesn't arrive in loud declarations or sudden bursts. Sometimes it arrives in the smallest gestures, repeated over and over until they form a truth too powerful to ignore. Claire's promise wasn't spoken. It was shown every single day in the way she looked at him, the way she stayed near, the way she made the world feel lighter just by being there. As the clock ticked past midnight, Claire finally closed her notebook and stood. She gave him that familiar, knowing smile, the one that carried all the words she hadn't said. "Don't stay too late," she whispered, just as she had before. But this time, Michael heard the deeper meaning. "I care. I always have." He nodded, unable to find words, and watched her walk away. Her steps echoed softly down the hall until the door closed behind her. And though she was gone, her presence lingered, filling the room with warmth. That night, Michael sat in silence, realizing the truth with absolute clarity. Claire had been speaking to him all along, not with words, but with her heart. And he had been answering her too, in the way he looked back, in the way he stayed, in the way he let the silence grow between them without breaking it. It wasn't a confession, not yet. But it was a promise, an unspoken one. A promise that whatever was happening between them was real, and that someday, when the moment was right, the words would finally follow. For now, though, the silence was enough. The looks, the gestures, the laughter, they were enough. Because sometimes, love doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes, it only needs to be felt. And as Michael finally packed his things and left the office, he carried with him the certainty of what he had learned. A woman who is deeply attracted to you doesn't always say it aloud. She shows it in her eyes, in her smile, in the way she chooses you without saying a word. And Claire had been showing him all along.